Hi folks, Smudge here. Hope everyone's keeping well. I've just started a few minutes early just because I want to make sure that everything is coming through. So if you can hear the audio coming through, then please let me know in the chat. I just want to make sure we go through the stream with no hiccups. So if you can hear the audio, drop us a little note in the chat. That'll be much appreciated. Great stuff. Thanks for confirming, Pat.
I've never seen a diamond in the flesh. I cut my teeth on wedding rings in the movies, and I'm not proud of my dress. In the torn up town, no postcode envy, but every song's like gold teeth, gray goose tripping in the bathroom, bloodstains, ball gowns, trash in the hotel room. We don't care. We're driving Cadillacs in our dreams, but everybody's like crystal, Maybach, diamonds on your timepiece, jet planes, islands, tigers on a gold leash. We don't care. We are caught up in your love affair, and we'll never be royals. The kind of love just ain't for us. We crave a different kind of buzz. Let me be your ruler. You can call me Queen Bee, baby, let me live that fantasy. My friends and I, we've cracked the code. We count our dollars on the train to the party, and everyone who knows us knows that we're fine with this. We didn't come from money, but every song's like gold teeth, gray goose tripping in the bathroom, bloodstains, ball gowns, trash in the hotel room. We don't care. We're driving Cadillacs in our dreams, but everybody's like crystal, Maybach, diamonds on your timepiece, jet planes, islands, tigers on a gold leash. We don't care. We are caught up in your love affair, and we'll never be royals. The kind of love's just ain't for us. We crave a different kind of buzz. Let me be your ruler. You can call me Queen Bee, baby, let me live that fantasy. Oh, we're bigger than we ever dreamed, and I'm in love with being queen. Life is great without a care. We are caught up in your love affair, and we'll never be royals. The kind of love's just ain't for us. We crave a different kind of buzz. Let me be your ruler. You can call me Queen Bee, baby,
Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is where you are. Hello and welcome to another live stream. Core, is this one going to be hopefully jam-packed with information for you all? It's been an absolute mission to get this all set up. I've just transferred over from using OBS to XSplit Broadcaster. And yeah, it's been great fun and games trying to get this set up. So how are you all? Hope you're all keeping well. And thanks for joining me for this live stream. I want this to be as interactive as possible. So if you've got any questions regarding mastering for streaming, loudness normalization and all of that goodness, please let me know in the chat. I really want to kind of get to grips with this whole loudness normalization thing because there's so much misinformation going on out there and there's so many offerings that I don't think are providing value, and this is the challenge we're all facing. And I want to dispel some of these myths once and for all because I find it frustrating that a lot of these features, and it's all sorts, whether it's from a distribution platform point of view, it's a plugin point of view, or even a DAW point of view. There's these features that are becoming more apparent, and I don't find them a benefit to anyone. I really don't. And I want to kind of dispel some of these myths, and I want you to get the right information so you can make sure that your mastering is top notch and you're getting the best sound possible. So if you've got any questions at all, please let me know in the chat. I'll keep the chat up on the mugshot here. If you do find it a bit distracting, then let me know, and I'll get rid of the chat from the screen. So yeah. So hope everyone's well. I haven't done a live stream for a little while now. And yeah, really enjoying just getting back into the swing of things. I've been so busy lately. So just give you a bit of an update as to where we are with things at the moment. I've just finished a lovely 7-song mastering project of an album, which the wonderful Tony who's joined us. It was for the band That's Sfumato Effect. And what I'll say, Tony, do you want to put a link in the chat for your Facebook page? So people can find out more information on the where they can find out more information on the release, especially in relation to physical copies, etc. So if you want to stick a link in the chat in relation to the That's Sfumato Effects Facebook page and where they can find more information, then please do so. We're going to do loads of videos in relation to the mastering of the actual project itself, but really getting to know the band's story. There's some great songs on this album, and what's really, for me, what makes this so much more worthwhile is this is a piece of music that's been written over many years and a lot of personal stories in the making of the album. So we're going to be doing lots of different bits in relation to interviews, etc. And yeah, so just really kind of want to highlight that. So that will be coming soon. But that was a great mastering project to work from. Pat, just a quick question: why the switch from OBS? Purely because OBS is a little bit hit and miss. So because it's open source, the challenge with it, every time OBS updates, you've then got to wait for a compatibility level for all the plugins. And what I've found is outside of the mastering, I also do some consultancy work for video conferencing facilities around setting up OBS and ensuring it all kind of started from the voiceover community. So I got approached by the voiceover community to do some help in relation to OBS. And what I'm just finding is the more and more I use OBS, it's becoming a bit of a pain in the backside. And it's all in relation to the updates, the plugins, the open source nature of it. Whilst it's good, it also can have issues. And even things like audio monitoring and audio loopback. If you haven't got an interface that's got a loopback feature, they do have a great plugin for audio monitoring, which you can do it all in OBS. But when they do an update, you've then got to wait for that to be updated. And it just got to a stage where I was becoming really frustrated and I wanted an all-in-one solution. So I did quite a bit of research and I come across this. So this is the XSplit Broadcaster. It is a paid for option, but I don't think it was a lot. I think a year's subscription was about 30 quid, something like 30, 40 quid. But the thing I like with this is the audio, you can route audio direct into it, and you can select whether you want it to come direct to stream. So I don't need to worry about audio monitoring and things like that. It'll all go through to you guys, and then what I'm using in conjunction with this, until I sort my interface out, I'm using voice meter just so I can actually hear back all the audio in real time as well. So that was pretty much the reason. It's just wanted a bit more of an all-encompassing solution that had support with it. So if there's any issues, I knew I can go to a company and actually sort those issues out. So that was pretty much the reason behind moving from OBS. I've even tried things like what's the other one? What's the other version of OBS which is done by the company which is Streamlabs OBS. I tried that one as well, and it's just the same as OBS really, and you don't get obviously the access to the third party plugins such as the audio monitor and things like that come with it. So I just thought I'd give this a go. I liked what it did, and yeah, I thought I'd give this a go. So this is the first one with it. Let me know the quality. Just let me know how it comes through. If it's all good, then it's certainly something I'll stick with moving forward. So right, let's get into the content of today's video. And what I've done is I don't want to follow a script, because I really don't like working from scripts, because I think there's part of me that it just loses some of the spontaneity. But there are a few points that I do just want to cover. So I'm just going to quickly get some notes up here. So first and foremost, before getting into anything in relation to the streaming, I just want to say a big shout out to the band A Little Hostile. The song I played in the intro there was the song Royals, and it's their cover of that song. It's a great song, and I had the pleasure of mastering this one. Any Reaper users out there will know of a chap called Mike Robinson. He's a top bloke, known him for a while, and he asked me if I could do the mastering for him in this one, and I had great fun doing it. And he's kindly given us permission to use the song as the example for today's video. So we'll be going through, that's the exact song. So it's the song that's played in the intro. It's a song called Royals by A Little Hostile. I've left the Spotify link, and I've left the Facebook page link, so please check them out. Those details are in the chat, and we'll go through the audio examples in a moment. So, but first and foremost, last week, so I released a video last week around the target loudness feature inside the Studio One. I don't want to make this a Studio One related video, because I don't want to be seen to be a bashing at Studio One. It's not designed as bashing at Studio One. The issue is more at large around the industry at present, and I'm seeing things like, to give you an example, obviously we've got the target loudness feature in Studio One, but there's also things like I noticed in one of the recent plugins. I think it was the Maximizer plugin by Sturgis Tones, that comes with the presets for loudness normalization. I even noticed this week, I looked at DistroKid. DistroKid are offering a normalization optimizing feature that's a paid for add-on. So if you upload through DistroKid, they've got this feature. And the challenge I have with all of these things is, whilst their intentions may be good, they're not going to work in the way that they need to work, and there's quite a few different reasons for this. But firstly, any preset-based normalization feature for me it just doesn't work in reality, because there's so many different normalization values that you have to consider. There's no one size fits all. So that's certainly one issue. The second issue is a lot of these features, they will work by just a straightforward attenuation. Straightforward attenuation, whilst in theory it's how it's meant to work, it doesn't work, and I'll show you the examples in a second. But then also you've got things like all of the different all the different streaming platforms will have different normalization levels. So if you use something like a DistroKid, TuneCore, CD Baby, etc., you can only upload one file. So if you upload one file, then at least some of them are going to have to normalize it anyway. So even if I was to upload one file to a certain target, they would all have to process them anyway. And even if I chose the -14 figure, even if I was to use that because Spotify said that's what they use, they still change it anyway. I'm going to show you some examples of this in a second. So this is why I really want to cover this feature, because I think there's just still a lot of misinformation about it, and I really want to get through and cover a lot of these things. But last week's video, I really was pleased with the feedback, because it's not only become one of my most popular videos at present, it shows me two things: that A, that you value the content and the teachings I'm offering, but B, there's an appetite to learn about loudness normalization. And this was the big thing for me: is, yeah, all right, it's not one of the most glamorous topics and glamorous subjects, but it's fundamental with modern music. And to have misinformation and, you know, this is not going to help you create better music, and this is why I want you to have the right knowledge to make sure that you have all the facts available to you to make the right decision when it comes to your mastering. The whole process and point behind setting up Mastering in the Box was my aim to give you all of that information. Mastering has always been seen as a dark art, and it really isn't. It's the fundamental things around mastering are not really that difficult, but I want to give you the tools and knowledge that you need to create the best music possible. And I will stress that has not and will not change. And, you know, I'm in a very fortunate position in that I'm not affiliated with a particular product, I'm not sponsored by a particular product, so I'm in a very good position where I can, you know, I can say if something isn't working as it's intended or marketed, then I feel I have a right to say, because you guys as the subscribers and followers of the channel, you know, I want to make sure that you are getting the right information and you're not being told something by a company that is wrong. So that is, you know, that this is the whole fundamentals behind Mastering the Box, and that will not change. I am going to follow this live stream up, and I'm going to do a new series of short style videos, because there is so much to cover. And yeah, alright, whilst it's not the most glamorous subject, there are a lot of different things that we do need to cover when it comes to loudness normalization. It's not as simple as LUFS, hit a LUFS number and away you go. There are so many aspects to it, so there will be a mini series coming up. Probably going to be no more than, say, 5 to 10 minutes each video, but we're going to cover so much around loudness normalization and mastering for streaming, that hopefully it's going to be a great reference for you, whether you're an artist, an engineer, or whether you want it for your clients. I really want just, you know, you can share it with everyone, and I really hope that people will just use it as a, you know, as a resource to come back to. I will keep it updated over time, you know, as things change, as they always do with streaming platforms. The theme for the live stream, I really want this to be a Q&A, so please ask away. I'll come back and have a look on the questions in a second. But we're going to cover mastering for streaming, the concept that is loudness standards, because there are no loudness standards, and the challenges we face with this concept when mastering. We'll cover what loudness normalization is, what it does and doesn't do, what LUFS are and how to apply them. I've even mentioned -14 LUFS integrated and why this may not be suitable for your music. Should I master to a specific LUFS value, and the challenges with LUFS as a target, and much more. So please ask any questions you've got. I have written down just a few questions that I've preempted that may be asked, so we'll go through those as we go through the live stream as well. So let's get back here. And we'll start going through some of the questions then. So it's probably a good place to start with then. What is loudness normalization? And I think this is one of the biggest maybe misconceptions, or one of the biggest fundamentals that people need to kind of really get to understand. Loudness normalization is not something that artists, engineers, or whoever is creating music, in theory, you shouldn't have to worry about it. Hi Mike, hope you're well, mate. Mike's in a wonderful corporate meeting today, so yeah, we'll have to give him some sticks, so he's on mute. But loudness normalization is not something in theory that us as engineers or artists or creators need to worry about, because the whole point of loudness normalization is this. Loudness normalization is a process that streaming platforms will use to create a consistent listening experience for the listener. That is the fundamental of it. So if you think how many millions of songs that have been released over how many years, they will all be mastered to different levels. So the fundamentals is for the streaming platforms to create a consistent listening experience for the end user, because no one wants to go around, you know, every time they play a song messing around with the volume knob. It's just not practical. So that's what loudness normalization is. It's a process. Hi Diamond District. So it's literally a process where streaming platforms will use to create a consistent listening experience. That's the fundamental, and I think this is the challenge where everyone thinks they have to comply with a standard, and they don't. And the reason for this is there is no standard. With the whole LUFS, so loudness units relative to full scale is LUFS, and the measurement which a majority of the streaming platform will use is a measurement called LUFS integrated. Now the whole thing around LUFS and how it differs from true peak. True peak is your decibel volume, and it's measuring your peak value or your true peak value at the highest point and over time. But LUFS is very much geared around the perceived loudness over a period of time. So there's three typical values. You've got integrated, you've got short-term and momentary. So they're the three typical LUFS values, and the short-term and momentary are over shorter periods of time, but the integrated is over the entirety of the song. And the way it works, it's going to measure the perceived loudness over the entirety of the song, and then the streaming platforms will use their processing to normalise to a value. The value is not regulated for streaming platforms. So this all came around through two real pieces of legislation. So it's the EBU R128 and the ITU 1770. So the ITU is for the US market, and the EBU is for the European market. There are others, but those are the two main ones that are quoted when it comes to loudness normalization. So EBU R128, the fundamentals of EBU R128 and the IT 1770 was for broadcast medium. So if you think about radio, TV adverts, even films, I don't know whether it applies to gaming industry, but that's something that it may well apply to. And the reason for this is what was happening over time is radio stations were playing music louder and louder and louder to compete with other radio stations. Likewise, because we perceive volume to be better, even adverts were getting louder and louder and louder. So the broadcasting unions basically said, no, we're having enough of this. So what they introduced was the EBU R128 and the ITU 1770 to introduce loudness standards for broadcast media. So when it comes to the mainstream music, it doesn't apply. So the EBU R128, I believe, is regulated to minus 23 LUFS integrated, and I think the ITU is minus 24 LUFS integrated. It's there or thereabouts. It may be even 22 or 23 for the EBU and 23 or 24 for the ITU, but it's there or thereabouts. So those are regulated broadcast mediums, and that is what the fundamentals of the EBU R128 and the ITU 1770. But it doesn't apply to mainstream music, so your streaming platforms are not regulated. This causes many challenges because they're then, if you want to upload your music to all of the streaming platforms, you don't have a consistent value. So for example, Spotify is at minus 14 LUFS integrated in their normal setting. They ask for a maximum true peak, but we'll come on to that. We'll come on to that a bit later. But they have a loud setting which is minus 11 LUFS integrated, and they have a quiet which I think is, don't quote me on this, I think it might even be minus 19. I'll confirm this in a minute. In fact, let me do this now. So let me get my browser up, and I'll quickly have a look on the Spotify. Spotify loudness normalization, because I know it's on their website, and they say quiet mode is minus 19 LUFS. So just for one streaming platform alone, you have 3 levels depending on what the listener wants to listen to. So whether it's loud, normal or quiet, you have 3 values. Apple Music are at minus 16 LUFS. So you've instantly got, between the top 2 players, say Spotify and Apple Music, if you use them as the top 2 players, you've got 2 values. Excuse me. I think it's Deezer at minus 15. And this is the challenge. What they also ask as well is for a true peak value. But there's still no consistency with true peak value. So the majority of them ask for a true peak level of minus 1 dB, but some ask for minus 2, some ask for minus 3, and it then depends on whether they have loud options or quiet options, etc. So That's the challenge. So when it comes to the certainly independent artists, the majority of people, if you use a distributor such as DistroKid, TuneCore, CD Baby, etc., 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 you can only upload one file. So what do you choose? Do you choose -16 for Apple, -14 for Spotify? What do you choose? So it's from that perspective, it's you've almost got to kind of take a step back and say, well, look, you're not going to meet them all. And it becomes especially more important when we look at the correlation between the true peak and the LUFS, because that's really important. It's not just about LUFS; it's about the true peak and LUFS, and the correlation between the two. So this makes it really difficult for anyone to look at loudness normalization from an artist or engineer's point of view and aim for a target, because there is no target. There's no one set value. So when it comes to target loudness, there is no such thing as target loudness because they all have different levels. So that's really the fundamentals of what loudness normalization, what the fundamentals of loudness normalization is. Now, the other thing as well is it's not just one set and done value. So this is another real quite interesting point. So when it comes to loudness normalization, we have generally two sorts of loudness normalization. So when we engineer, let's say we do an album, we have our individual LUFS measurements for each individual song, and when it's uploaded to, let's say, Spotify, for example, they will, when it's played back in the album format, it will be normalized as an album. So you will have the artist intent and the engineer's intent. So you will have it normalized, and it will follow the flow between each song as intended. So it's what's classified as album normalization. But it's not the only normalization they apply, because if a song gets taken out of the album and played in isolation or in context of a playlist, then obviously you don't have the artist or engineer's intent. So that means then it gets put into a playlist with lots of other different songs. So they have playlist normalization as well. So it changes. It's very flexible and it's very fluid in the way it works. So even though Spotify will say, well, they will give guidance around -14, they don't always stick to -14. It's not a flat -14 across the board because it fluctuates, and it fluctuates based on how it's being listened to by the end user. So this is why the algorithms from the streaming platforms are far more advanced than just a straightforward attenuation feature. So when I see these features and they say, well, we'll optimize it for streaming, they can say they optimize it for streaming and they can do a dB attenuation, but the reality is the streaming platforms are still going to normalize it anyway. So even if I use an optimized feature for Spotify and upload it at -14 LUFS, Spotify would still do their thing, and it will fluctuate depending on how it's being listened to. So that's another thing. A lot of these features, they don't cover this. They don't take that into consideration. And this is another one of my real bugbears. So in a nutshell, that's what loudness normalization is. That's what it does and it doesn't do. It's not a hard and fast setting. One other thing to point out before we go on to some of the other questions and some of the other examples: not all streaming platforms apply normalization consistently based on the medium that's being used to play. Let me try and put this into context. So let's say my laptop, I have the app downloaded. So I have the Spotify app downloaded on my laptop. If I play through the Spotify app, it's normalized based on whether I set it to loud, quiet or normal. If I listen to Spotify through the web player doesn't have normalization. So it doesn't apply normalization, which creates a challenge. I think also if you use TVs, I think if you've got the app on your TV, I don't believe they have loudness normalization. So it's not even consistent across every single device. If you have the app downloaded on the majority of devices, they will have normalization. But on some, like the web player or the TV devices, they have no normalization. So it's not even consistent amongst all devices yet, which also, once again, it kind of creates this kind of challenge of, well, how do you follow a guideline when they're not even applying those guidelines to every single device that it could be listened to. So I think this also creates another challenge, which then, it kind of questions why you would then look to aim for a target. I really want to keep my personal opinions to a degree out of this. And this takes me on nicely to some of the questions. So one of the questions I had through the other day, it was the only question that I got on my last video that was a little bit salty, and it was around about, you know, the loudness wars. And my question that I've written here, this is not quoted from a comment on the previous video, but I've just wrote the question: are you sure you're not just being a grumpy old fart because you've got the hump with all the loudness wars? No, it's not. This is not what this is about. So for those who don't know, just a very brief introduction on the Loudness Wars. The Loudness Wars is very much it follows the same kind of lines as the broadcast medium. And when it was released, music was getting louder and louder and louder, and it was almost kind of a competition between who could get the loudest song. So that was effectively the Loudness Wars, and the Loudness Wars have kind of come to a head through the streaming platform, saying, well, we're going to start to normalise the music, because that way you're not going to start getting a competitive advantage just because you're making a song louder. As humans, we perceive loud to be better, but it doesn't always mean it is better, because it can affect the integrity of the song, which is, you know, as a listener, you don't want to, even though it may be great because it sounds loud, if it's distorted and crap, it's not going to be a very good end product. So it's not really a good listening experience. So with the streaming platforms, the theory behind all this is to kind of to quash or quell the loudness wars and create that consistent listening experience. Now, I have no issues with that at all. In fact, you know, I wouldn't say. I'm not really one of these people that's kind of like, I'm a big supporter and trying to aim for a target or smash everything to -6 or -8 LUFS. That's not me. So loudness wars for me, I couldn't really care about making the loudest master possible. What I want to do is create the best sounding master possible. With mastering, there's always a bit of a compromise over something, and it's getting that balance between dynamics and loudness and getting that sweet spot. And for me, it doesn't have to be super pushed, and we'll go on to the one of the masters that I did. So the Royals song by Little Hostile. This is one that I mastered, and I think I'll show you in a second where we got it to. I think it was around -12.2, so it's not really smashing it, and it's not that far away from -14. And there's a few reasons why I chose that particular level for this song, but it's not about the loudest wars for me. It's just about creating a great product for the artist or the engineer, whoever's employing me to master their music. That's key. That is fundamentals. So before anything else is getting the best master possible. If that means that it may be -10 or -12 or -13, it might even be -14. So be it. I'm not, you know, I'm not one that's gonna be one way or the other. I'm not super. Yeah, everything has to be at -14. I'm also not, no, everything has to be smashed at -4. There's so much area in between that, you know, it's kind of you just got to kind of. For me, it's about trial and error and getting the best possible sound. So this is not about the loudness wars at all. So let's kind of go through some of these questions. Actually, before I go any further, let's have a quick look at the chat. Is there anyone? Hi Dwight, hope you're keeping well, mate. There's no questions coming through. If you do have any questions, fire them in the chat, and I'll answer any questions as we go through. So let's go to one of the other questions then. So let's have a look here. What have I done with them? Here, so we've got Spotify recommends -14 LUFS integrated, so why not just use that? So there's a few reasons really. We've covered some of them already, but -14 LUFS integrated is not going to cover every single streaming platform. So even though Spotify recommends it as their guideline, Apple Music don't. I think it's these that don't. And there's so many variances between the different platforms. So just because Spotify recommends it, if I master to -14 LUFS, then one of the others, I've got to turn it down. So it doesn't really make sense to aim for a figure, because it's, you know, there's no standard. So if they recommend it, then so be it. A lot of these recommendations come into play, especially when it comes to their true peak values. So one of the things we need to look at here is the correlation between LUFS integrated and true peak, and this is very, very important, because a lot of the recommendations will ask for a value of minus 14 LUFS integrated with a true peak value of no higher than minus 1 dB. So why do they set the true peak value? They set that true peak value there because as part of the upload and encoding process, invariably there's going to be some gain added when it comes to being processed and uploaded on the streaming platforms. So what that is you call it like almost like a safety buffer. So it allows the streaming platforms to have a safety buffer. So when they do that uploading and encoding, you're not going to end up with a clipped song at the end of it. So that is why they will have a true peak value. And some will differ. If you use Spotify Loud at minus 11, for example, I think it's minus 2 or minus 3. They will ask as their true peak value, because they know that for the louder levels, they will obviously have to increase the gain, and therefore you need to have more headroom to ensure that there's no clip at the end of it. So it's really more important about that correlation between the LUFS and the true peak rather than just looking at the LUFS measure. So yeah, Spotify recommends minus 14 LUFS integrated, but just because they do doesn't mean that the others do. And this is the challenge. If you're using one single distribution platform, you need to ensure that it's going to sound good on all of the platforms, not just one. Right, I'm going to come to this one next. We're going to go through some examples now. Doesn't minus 14 LUFS integrated make my track more dynamic? It's a great question, and the answer is yes and no. So what do I mean by yes and no? So if I quickly go over here, we're going to flip over to DAW mode. So if I click on over here, and I've got to change screens here. So what I've got here is these are the masters here. So I've done, these are all different examples that I've worked on throughout the day. So what I've got here is my original master, and I've got here one that I've just run through a render normalized to minus 14 LUFS. So this example here is just to show you what's going to happen when you normalize through attenuation. So here's the master, and if I open up the Loudness analyzer, oh, let's quickly change that over to the other screen. So if I ping that over here, you will see here, so this is the original master. We've got the integrated loudness at minus 12.1. But if you look here, the dynamic range, we've got 10.2 and 8.5 LUs. Now, what I've also done is, like I say, I've run this through an attenuation or minus 14 LUFS integrated. And if I get this analyzer up, and if I drag this one over, you will see here that the range and the dynamic range hasn't changed. The range is literally 0.1 less, and that's more likely to be with the fact where I've stopped the playback when doing this test over anything else. So you can see the attenuation here. It's 2 LUs. 1 LU is equivalent to 1 dB. So to get to from minus 12.1 to minus 14, there is a little bit of what do they call it? Room for error. So what they do is they literally do a 2 dB attenuation to minus 14. So here you'll see a max true peak of minus 1.8, and on the normalized version minus 3.8. So obviously you'll get then these values here will change by certainly these two values here will change by 2, the max short term and the max momentary, because it's just a dB attenuation. But you can see here, just by normalizing to minus 14, it does not affect the dynamic range of the track. So if you have one of these features, and they'll say they will optimize it for streaming, and they use an attenuation basis, it doesn't do anything. It's not going to do anything, any positive things to your track. What's it doing? It's not affecting the dynamic range at all. It's not creating more dynamic range. That is not something that attenuation feature will do, and it's evidenced here. So this is one of the things I just want to really kind of explain to people. Just because it's optimized, and it says it's optimized, if it works on an attenuation basis, it is not going to improve the sound of your master. In fact, all it's going to do is it's going to try and replicate what the streaming platforms do, just in a poorer way, because it's not going to take in all those nuances of the album normalization and the playlist normalization, and it's not going to be flexible. It's just a rigid number. So when you upload this at minus 14 LUFS integrated to your streaming platform, they're going to do it regardless. So it just makes some of these features just completely pointless. So minus 14 LUFS integrated doesn't necessarily make your track more dynamic if you are using an attenuation process for your optimization. What can make it more dynamic though is how you process it. So here is a track, and all I've done is this is the mix, and I've just put a limiter on the track here, and we'll see the loudness meter comes up at, let's just quickly move this across the screen here. So you've got an integrated LUFS measure of minus 12.2, and you'll see here the dynamic range of 11.2 dBs. And this was effectively done by using just purely a limiter. Let me drag this across. So the limiter here is, we've got a 1 dB ceiling, or minus 1 dB ceiling, and there's 3.5 dBs worth of input on the limiter. That is the only processing I've applied to that particular track, just as an example, and we get to minus 12.2 integrated with a dynamic range of 11.2, and the LU range here is 7.7. But there is a way that minus 14 LUFS can be more dynamic, and if I show you this example here, so we can get to minus 14.1 LUFS integrated, and as you see here with a dynamic range of 13.2, and the LU range is similar, but as you can see here, the average dynamic range, there's 2 dBs more average dynamic range. So how do you get there? This is not through attenuation. This is not by using a feature that's going to be a part of a piece of software. This is manual process, and it's effectively simple as, don't push so much compression into your song. Limiter, a 1.6 dB input. That is it, just backing off the limiter. And what it's allowed me to do is reach minus 14.1, and I've therefore got 2 dBs worth 2 dBs more dynamic range. It's not through attenuation, it isn't, or through an attenuation through a piece of software. It is a manual process by not pushing the limiter so hard, therefore not squashing the mix so much. Limiter. The fundamentals of the limiter is effectively just a super heavy compressor with an unlimited ratio that's, it's really there to kind of brick wall, make sure you don't go over a ceiling. So if you back off the limiter, and if you was to want a more dynamic master over than something that's say minus 12 LUFS, you back off your limiter, you can get a more dynamic master, and then you'll ultimately end up with an integrated LUFS of around minus 14. So that's how you do it. It's not done by an attenuation feature. So that's something I really want to kind of get people to understand. If you're at say minus 12 and you want more dynamics, back off your compression, back off your limiting, and you'll find that you'll be able to get a more dynamic master that way. So that's where minus 14 people can really slip up, which is why it's so crucial to look at the impacts of both LUFS and true peak, or your overall peak level, and how you're applying those to get a more dynamic master. So let's have a quick look now. If I go back over here, I just want to see if there's any questions come through, because that was quite that's quite an important one, that one. What do you feel are appropriate guidelines to aim for? I often find it difficult to get minus 1 true peak and minus 14 LUFS together. Any suggestions about how best to achieve this? Great question. Now, I think there's lots of different ways to achieve it, Pat, and I think it really depends on ultimately how much headroom are you leaving. So this is one of the things where a lot of people, because of the way that mastering was done traditionally, how it was done traditionally back in the tape days, there was always this kind of concept when it comes to the end of the mix, they aim for 6 dBs of headroom before it goes to mastering. So you'll look with a peak level at minus 6 before it then goes to mastering. And people still take that over to modern days, and there's a lot of guidance around minus 6. Minus 6 for me is probably unnecessary, if I'm perfectly honest, and one of the ways where you can maybe achieve a greater average perceived loudness and getting the true peak is maybe just raise up the clip value. Before you even think about doing any limiting, maybe just increase the actual gain on the clip itself, because that way you're going to get volume across the piece without compression. So that's one thing. The true peak really is really set by your limiter. So it will get to a stage where you'll have to use a limiter to set a ceiling at -1 dBs, because that way you know that whatever you do gain-wise into the limiter, that's going to be capped at the ceiling of -1. Then basically you can just you can push more gain into your limiter, but it will get to a stage where obviously you'll start to get a lot of compression. So that is the kind of the sweet spot, and you've got to find out where is that sweet spot between dynamics and loudness effectively. But if you're getting to a stage where you're finding it difficult to get to -1 dB true peak and -14 lufs together, I would suggest either looking at the clip gain first to maybe get the overall loudness of the track louder before it even starts to hit any compression or limiting. Another thing you can do is if you start to get to a stage where you're using a limiter and you start to hear it compressing very quickly, or, you know, if you're having to put, say, maybe 3-4 dBs into one limiter or more, then maybe one limiter is not the right option. Maybe use two limiters in tandem. One of the things I find quite useful is the stack limiters, and I've got a video on this on the channel. I've mentioned this before about stacking limiters. What you can always do is use your final limiter as the ceiling. So use that as a -1 dB ceiling, so you know that that's going to be the final true peak value. And you could almost maybe put a dB, 2 dBs worth of gain. It really depends on how much you need. But then put another limiter before that. With that one, maybe use, say, a ceiling of around -0.3, -0.5, because that's not really going to be your brick wall. The final one will be your brick wall. And then you can maybe add a dB or 2 dBs gain increase with that one. Because what you'll find is you're not going to start to stress a limiter. And if you start to stress a limiter, it really clamps down quickly. It will really crush the dynamics, and you'll have more risk of having artifacts, that kind of thing involved in the track itself. So if you're really starting to find that one limiter isn't doing it, then maybe put two limiters. If it's the same limiter, same copy of the limiter, just with different settings, then try that as well. Tokyo Dawn limiter 6G. I'll tell you what, I haven't tried that one yet. It's the only. I've only got two more GE editions to get, and that's the Nova and the limiter, and I really want to try the limiter 6 out. I love the Tokyo Dawn plugins. I use the Molotov I've recently used, and I love the sound of that. That saturation on there is just fantastic. I also have the what's the mastering EQ? Oh, I can't. I've got Kotelnikov. I've got that one, and there's the two EQs. Slick EQ, I've got the mastering and the standard, all those four in the gentleman editions, but I need to get the other ones. But that would be my suggestions. If you get into a stage where your true peak level is, you know, it's starting to push above the true peak. Another thing I also sometimes find is if I set the ceiling to -1, and if I get to a stage where the limiting is starting to, even if the ceiling isn't capping it at -1, so if I've, say, added 3 dBs worth of gain into the limiter, and I find that the true peak levels, say, -0.6, -0.7, then sometimes all I do is just back off the ceiling. So I might put the ceiling down, say, -1.2, -1.3, something on that kind of line. So the ceiling's higher, so it kind of counteracts the few overs. I mean, I wouldn't get too worried about a little bit of overs. So if you end up with somewhere around -7, -8, sorry, -0.7 and -0.8 on a true peak value, you're generally going to be fine. Even if you do get a little bit of clipping, it's going to be so low that it's unlikely to be audible. If you listen to some of the modern records that are going out there, you're looking at +2, 3 dBs over, and you're going to have audible clipping going on anyway. So I would try those things. Hi Gary, hope you're well, mate, and thank you for the feedback that we gave you the other day, which is Gary kind of really come up with some great suggestions on some guidance, which is kind of the inspiration for this live stream and will be the inspiration for the mini series coming up as well. So just for anyone who's joined the stream and who didn't hear the first part, there will be a mini series following this live stream, and I'll be going over this in depth. So we'll be going through all different aspects of the loudness standards and mastering for streaming, and we'll be doing it in bite-sized chunks. So there'll be a resource, whether it's for yourself, for any clients, or any other engineers or whoever you want to share it with. Hopefully there'll be a good resource that you can refer to, and I'll keep it updated as we go through. Tony also used Julian Pro. Funny enough, me and Tony had a chat the other day about Julian, and I downloaded it, the free version. I will get the paid for version because I know you can use that in standalone, and I need to kind of sit down and go through that, because that would be very useful for measuring different loudness. Not different loudness measurements, but seeing the impact of songs at different levels. So I will get the pro version, but I did download the free version and I did use it on the tracks. However, it was just a bit kind of, the resizing wasn't particularly. Every time I kind of closed it and reopened it, it just reopened at full. Whereas if I click the Butte, I think it was that one, it kind of stays on the more compact view, which I kind of liked, and I'll show you some more about those in a second. No worries at all, Pat. So if anyone else has got any more questions, then please just drop them in the chat and we'll go through them as we go through the stream. So what was next? So we covered minus 14 LUFS. Does it make my track more dynamic? Yes and no, depending on how you master. I've mastered my track to minus 14 LUFS integrated. So why does it sound quieter? Okay. This is I'm going to go back to, let me quickly flick over here. I'm going to go back to the mugshot view here, and we'll come back to the door in a second. So minus 14 LUFS, and so Spotify. Let's use Spotify as an example again. So they recommend, for their guidance, they would ask for recommended values of minus 14 LUFS integrated with a minus 1 dB true peak. Now, this causes some challenges because it's the way that normalization works, and depending on how you listen to the song. So the whole preface behind normalization is it's going to be done on an attenuation basis, or it should be done on an attenuation basis. And it doesn't quite work like that, which I'll show you in a second. So if you're, as I say, minus 12 LUFS integrated with a minus true peak value of minus 1. To get to minus 14 LUFS, they will attenuate by 2 dB. So you'll end up with a minus 14 LUFS integrated file with a true peak value of minus 3. That's how it should work. So they would just reduce attenuate the signal by 2 dBs to get to the minus 14 LUFS. But if you're at minus 14, bang on, at minus 1 dB true peak, because that is the way that normalization works going the other way, if you're at minus 1 dB, they will not increase the loudness of your track. So there's a few challenges here. So if your track is in a playlist, for example, and let's say generally it will be, the algorithm would normalize it in that playlist, say minus 13.6 LUFS integrated, can't get there. It can't turn it up that 0.4 dB because you've capped the ceiling at minus 1. So it will not turn up anything above minus 1 dB true peak, because that will then, they don't want to do that because that runs the risk of clipping. So this causes some challenges. If you, for example, you use, if you love Apple Music, you love MacBooks, and you're all into Apple and everything's Apple, and let's say you use Apple's loudness normalization value of minus 16 LUFS integrated with a true peak of minus 1 dB. If I hit those figures bang on, I'm stuffed on Spotify, because as soon as I upload it to Spotify, I'm instantly 2 dBs quieter than everyone else. And the perceived loudness will be minus 2 LU. So if someone's mastering on Spotify at minus 14, but I've optimised for Apple Music at minus 16 with that true peak, because the true peak value is capped at minus 1, the only way to get it louder is to boost it higher. And if that's then going to cause clipping, they won't do it. So minus 1 dB is the cap. So if you use Apple Music's guidelines at minus 16 with minus 1 dB true peak, yet you also release it to Spotify, you're going to sound way quieter than the competition. So that's kind of, it's a lot of the things you've also got to think about. And it's one of the reasons why I've always said master to at least minus 14 LUFS integrated with a minus 1 dB true peak. Because that's the only way you're really going to be putting the algorithms into a position where they can do what they need to do. Because if you're bang on minus 14 and bang on minus 1, if they need to push it further, they can't do it, so they won't. So you almost run the risk of, it's almost cutting your nose off to spite your face to a degree if you was to do it to bang on -14 and -1. So those are the kind of reasons generally why your tracks will sound quieter. There is a discussion around. I'll give you an interesting example. So if I've got a rock track, say a hard rock track, and the dynamics are such where the actual master is less dynamic but more average all the way through, because it's effectively compressed. Yes, your louder parts are lower because they've been limited, but your quieter parts of the song are louder. So you'll find that the average across the piece at times will be louder than a more dynamic track. If you've got something that's got a very quiet section and a very loud section, you can be hitting the same lust values on both songs, but the quieter parts on the more dynamic track will sound way quieter, but the louder parts will be louder because you've got more headroom with the peak values. So you can achieve a louder master by having more dynamics in your master, even though that the rock track at times will sound louder. When it comes to the loudest part of the more dynamic track, because it's got more wiggle room with the lufts, it could be louder because there's not so much compression needed on the peaks to get to the -14 value. So it's really all about balance. I did a video of this a little while ago, and maybe I'll have a look in a minute, and maybe I'll see if I can get the link and I'll put it in the chat so you can see what I actually did with the experiment. So there were 2 different tracks that were normalised to the same or mastered to the same lufts level, but obviously because one was more dynamic and the other one was more compressed, the compressed track, while sounded quite a bit louder in the quieter parts of the other track, it actually sounded quieter in the louder parts of the other track. So it's quite an interesting dynamic there, and it's something that could also be at play if you're compressing too much before or during the limiting or in mix stage. Then yeah, your average may seem quite high, but at times compared to other songs it can be quite a lot lower. Let's have a look. What other questions have we got there? My door plugin distributor has a feature that optimises for streaming. Should I use it? It's entirely up to you whether you use it. I would not recommend it for these particular reasons that I've explained already. And it's more to do with the fact it's around the actual... it's the way they work. If they're attenuating the signal, they're not going to add more dynamics to your track, and the streaming platform is going to have to normalise it anyway. It will do it automatically through their algorithm. So for me, I wouldn't recommend it because it's not adding value, especially when some of these distributors are charging for that particular feature. So no, I wouldn't recommend it on that basis. I'm going to head on back on over to the door now because I want to show you guys some bits that I've been looking at today. So as I discussed earlier on, this is the track A Little Hostile, Royals by Little Hostile. It's their cover, and this was the original master. It was the song that I played in the intro. And please, there's some links in the chat. I will update the video description as well to leave some further links in. Please check out the song. I'll leave some links for Spotify and their Facebook page. It's a great song, and it's really worth checking out. Let's play... In fact, I won't play the song just yet. We'll play it in a little while. What I want to do is show you some different things. So this is we've gone through some of the dynamics sections, but what I want to do is kind of show you some of the differences in what Spotify actually do. So what I've actually been able to do here is to get a copy of the stream from Spotify, and then we can compare this against the original master and the normalized master. So if I just quickly open these up here, so this is the original master, minus 12.1 LUFS integrated with a dynamic range of 10.2. I then took that master and I normalized it using a straightforward attenuation. And we can see here we've got the LUFS integrated of minus 14. In fact, I'm just going to make these smaller because I need to create some more space. So we've then got the LUFS integrated minus 14, but the dynamic range, it hasn't changed because it won't. It's an attenuation. So it's just attenuated the song by 2 dBs, hence the reason why the momentary, the max short term, the true peak, they're all reduced by 2 dBs or 2 LUs, as is the integrated. But what we can see by looking at the Spotify, and this actually this surprised me a bit today, and I'm going to show you why. So this is the feed from Spotify. And let's move these over a little bit more now. And it surprised me and worries me a little bit. Because the way loudness normalization is meant to work is by attenuating the signal. So to get from -12 to -14, they should just do a dB reduction. But on the right hand side here, these are the results coming from Spotify, and it's interesting reading. So this is once again why I say there is no hard and fast -14 number. Because you can see here, it's not -14 bang on, it's -14.2. And it will fluctuate depending on whether this was part of a single or a playlist. But look here, the LU range has actually decreased by, if you go over the original master, it's actually worsened by 0.2 dB or 0.2 LU. But the average dynamic range has actually increased by 1.5 dBs. And this is the bit that kind of gets really tricky, and this is why I don't think you can take a simple attenuation on face value. So the feedback we're getting as part of the industry is that it is an attenuation process, but it can't be, because we can see here when you attenuate it through a render or something like that, you will see here everything moves by 2 dBs to get to your -14. But obviously that hasn't happened here. The max true peak has only decreased by 0.7 dBs. So the song itself has been normalised 2.1 LU quieter, but only by reducing the max true peak by 0.7 dBs. This actually worries me a little bit. I say it worries me and it doesn't. I need to look into this more. But this is probably the more interesting factor, because the LU range, which is a measure of dynamics, it deteriorated over the original master, but the dynamic range increased by 1.7 dBs. It suggests some form of processing has gone on. Now, the way that normalization is fed back to the industry is that there's no processing going on. But it just doesn't, something here just doesn't quite sit right. So if you look at 14.2 from where we are here, so if it's -14.2 is 0.2 LU, it's 0.2 LU quieter than our normalized version. You can see here the max short term and the momentary, they follow suit. So they're both 0.2 quieter than our original normalized. But it's the max true peak and the dynamic range. Now, I have a few theories around this, so this is why, once again, you can't trust the standard attenuation on face value, which is why a lot of these features, that they just don't work. And the reason why you can't trust these on face value is because, obviously, one thing we haven't considered is the encoding process. So this is a version of the song that's been uploaded to the streaming platform. The streaming platform have done their encoding, they've uploaded it, done the processing they need to do, and the feed from the back end is showing a track that's 1.5 dB more dynamic. Now, I don't know how they've done that, because the only way to do that is by using some form of, let's say, expander or something like that. The only other theory I can think of is maybe, obviously, when they've done an attenuation to get to, say, -3.8 or -4, they then have done something to get the max true peak back up again. But how would they do that without affecting the LUFS? So I really don't kind of understand how they're getting to these results, or what's happening in this transcoding process. But obviously something clearly is happening, because even though the LUFS are here, it's showing more dynamic range as an average, but yet we can actually see that the LU range meter here, the LRA, is actually worsened. So obviously something there is happening. So I really need to kind of get my head around this a bit more. It's going to be something to do with the encoding process. What was really quite interesting as well is, to get to these examples that I'm showing you today, I had to do a lot of a sample alignment to make sure that the files were all starting at the same place and all finishing at the same place. Because if it's not, I mean, I'm not going to say these are going to be completely 100% sample accurate because they're not, but they're there or thereabouts. Because if you start at different positions and end at different positions, then your LUFS integrated will be different. Because it could well be that you may have more quiet space at different parts of the song, which will affect the overall reading. But yeah, it's interesting how we've got this dynamic range here, because they are normalising it but creating more dynamic range. But yet they're doing it in a way that's not playing how it should do with the true peak. So this is really interesting. It's something I'm going to need to take away and find out a bit more around the full processes, because it kind of, once again, it kind of makes a little bit more of a mockery of some of these optimizing features, because obviously clearly it's not working in the way that or that's the encoding process isn't working as we're being led to believe through the feedback in the industry. So I really wanted to kind of show this one to you, and it's strange. I really can't fathom it. Everything else looks fine except for that dynamic range value, and it's the same value. I think if I did the Julian, has it saved the results? Let's have a look here. Yeah, so it's 8.2. So if I resize that there, so the range is slightly different. So that's going to be, within the range of error, so to speak. LU dynamic range, the average dynamics PLI is the same, 11.7. Max momentary 10.9, 11.8. So it's there. It's there within that, within that area, and the true peak there is 2.5. So it's not as if it's kind of the analyzer is spewing out some different results, because it's obviously on Julian as well as on the Butte. So that was really interesting. And I found this something I found today. But this is all going to change per streaming platform. And I've done some testing previously with Apple Music, and Apple Music worked differently at that point. Now, Apple Music have since announced that they've now using LUFS as their measurement for their normalization. It wasn't LUFS, it was an equivalent to, but it wasn't exact. So I know that Apple Music, their algorithm is going to work differently to Spotify. And if you then think of Amazon Music, you think of Deezer, YouTube Music, Tidal, they're all going to differ. So it once again, it kind of makes it a bit more of a challenge to even consider using a target figure, because even if you use a target figure, they're all going to do something different to the file anyway. So I just wanted to share that with you, and I hope you found that useful. I just want to come back and see if we've got any more questions, because I know that was quite a bit of a word, bit of a mouthful, that one. Let's go back to the mugshot. Can you give any thoughts about using brick walls set on the limiter for mastering? I've heard several times it's not the best. Not sure if it's bad info or based on some science and issues that arises. Great. I mean, to be fair, a brick wall is renowned for just that. It's a brick wall, and the challenge with a brick wall is that you're obviously going to get to a stage where you are going to compress quite a bit harder than say a more a gentle limiter. I don't know if that's probably the right way I'd put it, but a brick wall is renowned obviously for just doing that. It's brick walling, so it's going to hit the dynamics hard. So that's the challenge with using something like a brick wall. What I would probably suggest is maybe using brick wall in a stage of 2 limiters. So if you use your brick wall last in the line as your brick wall with a ceiling, then maybe not push so much gain with that, and then maybe use a limiter before it. Maybe something, I like the stealth limiter by IK Multimedia, because I know it doesn't squash the doesn't squash the master so much. It's probably one of the most, it's not, transparent is not the right word, but it's probably one of the most gentle limiters, because it kind of gets you where you need to get it without sounding too squashed. So maybe it will be something like using a brick wall last in the chain to act as that ceiling, and maybe a limiter before it to kind of to stage the limiting, so you're not going to overstress the brick wall, and you're going to get a much more gentler limit, more dynamics, and you can use a brick wall that way. So that would really be my kind of suggestion. I ask because I always use it. I mean, yeah, you know, it's certainly, there's no wrong or right way to do it. It's just more about the end results, and a lot of it could be genre specific as well. If you've got a more dynamic mix that you're trying to master and you want to retain a lot more dynamics, then maybe a brick wall may not be the best solution. But it's certainly, you know, you can certainly just experiment with it and get some different results. It's also be quite interesting to see if your brick wall limiter, does it have an attack and release setting? Not all limiters have attack and release settings, but if it does, then maybe try and experiment with a slow attack and a fast release, if it does. Because sometimes what you'll find is if you've got a slow attack, it's really not clamping down on the transient, which means you're not going to get that pumping. And the quick release will mean that you're not getting that delayed compression sound. So it's just more, it's really more just controlling some of those peaks. So that, if it does have an attack and release, then that might be also another good way to look at it. Gary, in a way this is good because I can just mix the levels that I think are right and leave the mastering level to someone else, be it a streaming platform or mastering guy. Like, yeah, exactly, and this is the thing, is it's, you know, it's you know, it's all down to, music is art, isn't it? And mastering is no different. And we've spoken about different things. We've spoken to Gary about different things around mastering. It's about how you know, it's we've talked about the balancing, and it's always sometimes when you do something to a master, and then maybe you can compromise something else. So it's then trying to find the balances and things like that. And it's no different with loudness. It doesn't really make sense to me to use a target, because a target, it's not going to do anything except for limit you in some way, shape or form. So it's kind of finding the balance of a song which give you sufficient loudness and compression that you like, and then kind of and kind of just leave it at that. There's no need to really kind of go further and worry too much about aiming for a particular number. And I think that's it. Be it a streaming platform, the streaming platform will do it anyway. Or if it goes to mastering, then once again, someone, you know, who's going to master the track will obviously listen to the track, or should very much use their experience to get that balance for you. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Pat asked people to use it. I say thank you. Okay, great. So yeah, so that's yeah. I'll just, you know, don't. My recommendation is always not stick to a particular number, because from experience you're going to hamper yourself more than do anything good. Doesn't mean you have to be, like I say, doesn't mean you have to be smashing the track. This isn't like Loudness Wars. If you want to get to -13 because you know it's going to get covered by majority of the streaming platforms, unless someone chooses to to listen to a loud option, -13 is going to give you pretty much coverage in all of them, as long as you've got the true peak there to act as the buffer when they upload it and do their processing. I was going to cover something else, and you know what? I'm a nightmare, because I haven't written it down and I've bloody forgotten it, and then it's kind of like, it's you can definitely tell that I'm getting to that stage where I'm starting to feel my age. I can tell you that. What else was going to cover? I was going to cover something else. It was something that was coming through. Let's go back and quickly chat about the mini-series, because this is one thing I do want to say. We're going to do a mini-series. We're going to cover this with examples and really kind of go into the nitty-gritty of it. I know I've covered a lot in today's live stream. What we'll be going for, it's probably about an hour and 15 minutes by now, and there's a lot of technical jargon and a lot of this and a lot of that. So I will be breaking this down into this mini-series, and we're going to be covering all sorts. We're going to be covering obviously the loudness normalization a little bit more in depth, what it does do, what it doesn't do, the theory behind it, and then we're going to go into things like the loudness levels for the different platforms, so you can see what the differences are, and then we're going to look at different examples of your LUFS, what happens to the LUFS when it goes and gets uploaded to a streaming platform, what attenuation is, how it works, and then we're also going to look at the correlation between the true peak and the peak value, true peak and the LUFS, which we've discussed today. And there's going to be lots of different kind of short videos that hopefully I really do think you're going to find a lot of value from them. So that will be coming really soon. I did want to mention the Loudness penalty website. So this was something I featured in my video last week, and this is something. It really is a great resource. And I think in my video last week, I didn't do it justice. And I know I put a comment in there saying it's a really good resource. It is a fantastic resource, and I'd highly recommend anyone to use it, because not only is it free if you do it online, but it tells you the levels in which the streaming platforms will turn your music down by. It's called the Loudness penalty. I won't give thoughts on why it's called the Loudness penalty, but there isn't actually a penalty. The penalty itself is the fact that you are potentially missing out on dynamics. So if I go to this whole issue of minus 14 dB with a 1 dB true peak, or minus 12. Sorry, let's start again. Minus 14 LUFS integrated with minus 1 dB true peak, or minus 12 LUFS integrated with minus 1 dB true peak. The minus 14 will obviously be more dynamic than the minus 12 if you have done the manual process and not relied on an optimization that's just going to attenuate. So if it's the manual process of backing off the limiter, not compressing the track so hard, then you can achieve more dynamics at minus 14 than minus 12. Now, the Loudness penalty website will effectively, that's what it will tell you. It will tell you, well, this is the Loudness penalty is the fact that you'll miss out on 2 dB's worth of dynamics. But it also tells you don't have to do anything. If you are happy with the sound of your master, you don't need to do anything at all. And that's the key with the Loudness penalty website. And it is a really good useful tool, because at least it kind of gives you an indication. You don't have to follow up on it. You don't have to do anything with it. It's just going to give you an indication what the streaming platform is going to do with your track once it gets uploaded. So that is the Loudness penalty website. I would recommend checking it out. I don't think the naming is particularly that helpful, but that's my only little bit with it. It's certainly not going to sound as good if they say you could achieve more dynamic range.com, is it? Let's put it that way. So it's Loudness penalty is the name, and it really is a great tool. So loudnesspenalty.com. It's actually done by a group of people which is headed by Ian Shepherd, and Ian Shepherd is a fantastic mastering engineer and a real advocate for teaching people how to master. And he's got some fantastic videos on YouTube and some great advice, and he's a really nice bloke to speak to. I've engaged with him a couple of times this week, and he's just really, really nice and really helpful. So check some of his YouTube videos out, and Loudness penalty, have a look at that as a resource, because I think that's going to be just a good indicator as to what the streaming platforms would do. So check that one out as well. And I still can't remember this blooming question, and it's really gonna frustrate me. Has anyone got any questions at all? If you've got any questions, leave them in the chat, and we'll go through them. I'll answer them as we go through. I think I've pretty much covered most things I wanted to cover. All of this is a premise that there's going to be some kind of compromise somewhere, and the compromise is getting that balance between volume and dynamics, and you've got to get the balance right to achieve the best sound which you think is the best sound. Once you've got that best sound and you're happy with the balance, then it's a case of get it sent out, get it uploaded to the streaming platforms, and they will sort out the rest. You don't need to worry about any features that will optimize, because they will do that for you. Yes. I've remembered what I was going to say now. As part of the testing today, I'm not going to cover this I won't cover this in detail, because I think it's just going to get a bit messy for the live stream. But one of the things I noticed was doing some testing. So I was trying to find out why the Spotify results were obviously different to the attenuated at minus 14 LUFS. So what I did is some kind of testing around. I did some kind of phase reversal on one of the songs to see if it would null, and it doesn't. It doesn't null, but it's a lot of high frequency information. It doesn't sound distortion, but I wonder if as part of the encoding process, maybe it's something to do with the quality of the quality of the downloads, because I know Spotify historically used Og Vorbis, but they reference now AAC on their website. So I wonder what happened is when I did know there was a lot of high-end information. So I'm really going to investigate that, because it sounds like it's either adding or taking away, and I need to this is what I need to really kind of sit down and work on. It's either adding high-end information or taking away high-end information. I wonder, actually, thinking about this now, some of these Spotify results, and this is where I'm going to do some more testing, I wonder if it's to do with the quality of the stream, because I made sure it was set to high before I did any capture. I'm wondering if it's something to do with AAC and whether AAC acts more like MP3. Because the MP3 and the way MP3 works is, if you do an MP3 file, it's not going to sound as high quality as a WAV file, so it's a lossy format. Generally, because as part of the compression of the file, they will lop a load of the high end off, which then makes sense with, I wonder if that's why this is showing different results, because if there's a lot of high-end information on the track which is being lopped off, then it may not be. Is it more compressed? It's certainly going to have a difference overall, but that's something to be investigated. So don't worry about that now. I'll feedback more on that, and I'll do some digging, because that will be really interesting to see whether it's to do with the test subjects I've used, rather than actually whether they're doing anything real funky in the encoding. Okie dokie. Well, there's no more questions at all. What's the time now? So we're coming up to 9:15. If anyone has got any more questions, then please drop them in the chat, and we'll go through, and I'll take some questions as we go through. If there's no more questions, then we'll wrap this up in a moment, because I don't want to kind of rabbit on and just bore you all to tears. No worries at all, Gary. It's just a bit of a. It really is. It's a bit of a minefield, and it does get frustrating when there is misinformation out there, and there are people that will say and advertise things that they say will do something positive when it doesn't, especially with volume attenuation. It really annoys me, because you can see quite clearly from the results. I don't know if you was here for this, Gary, but I'll quickly show you this anyway. So what we did is we did an example, and for anyone else who's joined the stream who wasn't here earlier on, I just want to quickly show you some results I did of some testing where my original master was at -12.1 LUFS integrated, and then what I did is I've run a version that was attenuated to -14 LUFS, and here's the -14 LUFS version, and here's obviously the original master. Whilst there is a 1.9 LU difference, dynamic range, it's not changed. And this is the thing, when you attenuate a signal just to hit a -14 value, it's not going to add a positive impact to your song, because it's not affecting the dynamic range. The only way to get -14 LUFS to sound better or more dynamic is to do that manually through backing off the limiting. So I just want to kind of reiterate to people there. You will see, so it's -12.1 to -14. There is obviously a margin of error, so you've got to then think, well, it's 2 dBs, which is equivalent to 2 LUs. So although the dynamic range hasn't changed, you'll see we've got 2 dBs or 2 LUs difference between these values here. So that's effectively how the attenuation is going to work. You will hit the minus by attenuating on the straightforward attenuation basis. It works by reducing the decibel value to hit the LUFS measure. So to get from -12 to -14, then typically it'll be -2 dB reduction, which is what we can see here. So just because you get a track that's optimised for minus 14 LUFS doesn't mean it's going to make it a better master, because it's not affecting the dynamic range at all. It's just the same track, just 2 dBs quieter. So if you want to make the most of minus 14 LUFS, then the way to do that is to do that manually through backing off your limiter, backing off your compression. But obviously it does have challenges, as we discussed, because once you cap your true peak at minus 1 dB, if a streaming platform needs to turn it up louder, it can't. So that's something just to bear in mind. But if you do want to use minus 14 as a guide, do so knowing that you do run the risk of having your track sounding quieter on the streaming platforms because of that capped true peak value. So that's just a recap there. Let's go back. Let's go to mugshot. No worries at all, Pat. Great to have you as part of it, and thank you very much for your questions. And we'll, I say, catch up soon. If anyone's got any more questions, feel free to drop me an email, and I'm going to drop the email address in the chat as well, just so people have got it. I'm more than happy to answer any questions, whether you want to leave them in the comment section down below, or drop me an email. If you prefer to drop me an email, smudge@masteringinthebox.net, and we can and I'll more than happy to provide any help. And if anyone's got anything in particular they'd like covered on some videos, then once again let me know. I've got quite a few different things in the pipeline, and but I'm more than happy if anyone's got any suggestions of things they'd like to see covered. Obviously I'll be covering the mini-series around mastering for streaming and the loudness normalization, but we can look at some different things as well. Okie dokie. So I'll just give it the last couple of minutes for any more questions. And Tony, did you put your link in the chat? I don't think you did. So Tony, if you can put your the Facebook link for That's Formato Effect into the chat, please. So I've just come off the back of mastering an album for Tony's band, That's Formato Effect, and we're going to be doing some videos on the process of the mastering. We'll be doing some videos around the writer of the actual album itself. It's a great album, and it's a collection of songs and stories that have been built up over 30 odd years, and it really is it's a great sounding album. The tracks themselves, I liken them to it's a retro sound with a modern twist, I think is the best way to put it. They might say it's more 80s inspired. I don't think it might be 80s inspired, but it's not a straightforward 80s. It's not a straightforward 80s vibe. It's got much more to it, and it's got this modern twist to it with the modern recording techniques and the modern processing. It just got that great vibe, which is why I say it's more retro. But it's a great sounding album, and that will be coming out soon. And we're going to be doing some work with Tony to show obviously the mastering side of things and actually how the album came into creation. Didn't work. I'll do it again. Let's have a quick look. I wonder if I can. Here we are. I've got it here. So here's a Facebook page for That's Formato Effect, and let me just quickly get the link to the website as well. Copy. I'll put that in there. So there's their website as well. So please check them out. It's going to be really good. I know they've got some plans for some physical releases as well as digital release and things like that. So more information on that will be coming soon. So let's have a quick look then. So we are now up to, just come up to an hour and a half. So we'll call it a day there then, folks. Thank you very much for joining in the live stream. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for thank you for your support. Once again, just to reiterate, the support I got from last week's video was amazing. It really is. It makes it all much more worthwhile, because it's. Sometimes it's when you do a video you don't know if it connects, but last week's video really connected with a lot of people, and it's good for two aspects. Like I said earlier, it's good because it shows me that you value the content, and you get interest in the teachings that I show, but also that it's kind of there is that willingness to learn about things like loudness normalization and mastering in general, which is great because when I know that there's that willingness to learn more, it kind of really inspires me to do more. And the whole ethos around this is about giving you the right information that you need to create great sounding masters. If there's a product out there that I think is not going to provide that, then I feel it's my obligation to say so, because I want you to have that right information. I don't want you falling foul of a certain product or feature that's not going to add benefit to you and your mastering. So thank you once again for all of your support. Thank you for your questions tonight. The live stream will be made available after the stream is ended in just a second. So please feel free to share, watch it as much as you want, and I will be following this up with the mini-series coming very soon, and we'll break this down into small bite-sized chunks so they're more digestible, and I hope you find it of use. So thanks once again, folks, and all that's left for me to say is I hope you'll keep safe and well, and I'll see you in the next video coming real soon.